My name is Chipiwa Kodisang. I am going to talk to you today about preparing for your postgraduate studies. The most important part of reflecting on your postgraduate studies is to start by reflecting and why it is important to reflect. Reflection will help you to gain perspective about your situation. What is your experiences of your postgraduate studies specifically? Because you need to reflect on where are you, what is even making it difficult for you to manage your time. Then we can also be able to reflect further on what to do in order to manage your time, especially thinking about what do I need to do differently. Furthermore, reflection questions are helpful to focus on what you did before when you could manage your studies. Of course, one other important thing in the year 2021 is also to take into consideration your learning context. We must remember that our new normal with the pandemic impact on learning, especially our time management. I am referring to our new normal because from last year we have been under the situation of the pandemic, which is not the same like our previous years. So in some ways, we can acknowledge this is our new normal. You had developed a system that possibly helped you during your undergraduate studies or even other studies that you have taken before this new learning context. Therefore, it is important now to recognize your new learning context and plan your time taking the new learning context into consideration. Because when we do that, we are not only looking at the new learning, but also to look at where we are as students, but also as human beings. A lot of postgraduate students we have interacted with have shared some few things which I thought it would be important to share with you. Maybe some of the statements resonate with you. Most students feel that they are not confident about their postgraduate studies, especially they fear failure, and it even makes it difficult for them to start with their studies. Every time they think about their studies, the thoughts of failing or of being unable to succeed sort of intrude. Secondly, they also have this issue of how do I make sure that I improve to be an effective postgraduate student. Most people would reflect on their undergraduate studies or other studies that they have pursued and feels that they can improve. Furthermore, due to the new learning, due to the postgraduate nature of studies, most people find it difficult to belong. They can't belong to the postgraduate studies and they feel quite voiceless and sort of not belonging and being lost in the system. Furthermore, we find people who are saying, I am stuck with ideas in my head and I do not know how to express them in a coherent manner so that I make sense. So this is also connected to what I said earlier on, where some students experience the feeling of not being confident. This could also lead to the feeling of having all these thoughts that you are questioning yourself time and again, and you are stuck with those thoughts in your head. Financial concerns are also some of the issues that some students raised that are distracting them to focus on their studies because this is something that bothers them. They are also not sure whether they will be able to succeed with their postgraduate studies. Furthermore, some students express that they wish they could manage better with stress. Other students, they are even surprised at how they met themselves in postgraduate studies in ways that are unknown and unknowable. So there is a revelation of a new person who is being revealed in these postgraduate studies, and they don't even know how to relate to this new person. Maybe now it's also important that we talk about academic performance markers. These are some of the things that are important as markers of successful academic performance. One, time management at a postgraduate level. Secondly, less study guidance provided, more reliant on exploration. So you must remember at this level of your studies, you are more reliant on yourself. Thirdly, entering the realm of research. You need to remember now the level where you are with your studies. You are already being introduced to the academic context, to become an academic, to become an expert in the field. Therefore, one of the things that you need to start learning is about research. In undergraduate level, it was more the introduction into the context. It was about mastering concept. Now you are moving further. And one of the things is developing academic curiosity. You need to be a critical thinker. You need to be curious about things, because that is one thing that would also motivate you or perturb you to become a researcher. You also need time to think and endure uncertainty. Unfortunately, with research, with curiosity, we never get certain. You are exploring. Some of this process of exploring can be quite overwhelming. And therefore, it's important to also know how to manage your uncertainty, but furthermore, also how to manage the information. As we continue with academic performance markers, some of those things are reading broadly and in depth continuously. As I just mentioned now, as you read broadly, you also need to know how to manage information, because in order to manage the information in such a way that you don't get overwhelmed, but you can still focus in the task, you also have to have sort of developed your own strategies to extract information from academic articles. Furthermore, it is important to experiment with more sophisticated note-making methods. Remember, at this level, as I said earlier on, you need to be an academic, you need to be a researcher, so you need to also be able to know how to discern the information. You need then effective note-making strategies to be able to know the information you need or you want for a particular task, but also to know how to put this information together. This links to the next part, which talks about making an effort to write academic essays or chapters well, because it's about writing skills, it's about developing academic acumen and character. One of the things is being able to read and write on a higher level. It is also important to appreciate the possibilities and the limitations of your field of study. Sometimes we are quite eager to solve a number of concepts, or when we are interested in something, we want to go further. But at this moment, we also need to know there are limitations in each particular field. And also, depending on the level where you are, you won't get all the answers, and there will be limitations that sometimes they could be frustrating. But one needs to know that there are further levels where certain issues can be explored. Let's now talk about managing your time. It's important that when we think about managing our time, we also need to think about what type of support do I need to be able to manage your studies more effectively. Because you can't manage your time if you don't have support. Because as individual human beings, we also need to appreciate that we are not only UNISA students, we have got other responsibilities. Even when you are just a student who is not working, who doesn't have a family, you still belong in a particular family where there are certain expectations from you. Therefore, you need the people around you to be able to support you. So you need to think about the support you need inside UNISA and outside UNISA. Remember earlier on, we also spoke about the context of learning where we find ourselves. So UNISA might not be able to provide certain type of support, but where can you get support? I am thinking now about, for example, the libraries are closed. That might be a type of support you would need from UNISA because you need a place to study. But if you cannot study at UNISA library, where else can you study? Could you perhaps think about the church? Could you perhaps think about the school after hours? Could you perhaps think about the neighbor's garage? So those are things that I am referring to when I'm talking about the type of support you need. I think then it also leads to, who will I ask for this support? Once you have identified your needs on the type of support you need, you also need to think about, who will you ask? And it's important that when you are talking about managing your time, because you are managing your time to study, you need to further think about, where and when will I study? Taking into consideration the context of learning of 2021 with the pandemic, you might be experiencing a lot of constraints. So you need to think about different possibilities, especially when thinking about where and when you will study. You need to think, can I study at night since during the day I am distracted? You are working from home, or kids are at home, or your siblings are at home. Therefore, it's difficult for you to study during the day. Then you need to think about, can I wake up early in the morning and study? That's why I also thought, could you think, where else can you study? Could you ask a church? Could you ask a school as a place to study? Another important thing is the preparation to study. You need to make time for your postgraduate studies. I cannot overemphasize the fact that in order to succeed with your postgraduate studies, you need time with that. Postgraduate studies can be quite overwhelming, unlike undergraduate studies where you need to know that you just need to read your prescribed books and your study guide. There is a lot of preparation required when you have to complete assignments and projects. Therefore, it's important that you make time to do all the necessary work before submitting certain tasks. You need to think about, how are you currently spending your time? Because once you have done that, you can be able to reflect on which other activities that you need to spend less time on to have enough time for your studies. Still focusing on preparation, you need to think about, have you budgeted enough time for your studies? Sometimes when I'm having conversation with people who are studying at UNISA, I would ask them, so when do you study? And people will say, when I get time. And of course, I become very concerned because you need to have budgeted enough time for your studies. It's a commitment. If you are studying full time, you have at least 40 hours available per week. How will you allocate the time then to study? You could spread out the 40 hours over 5 or 7 days, depending on your circumstances. You want to get into a rhythm that allows you to cover all the modules every week, reading, note making, and completing the assignments, or finishing writing chapters. When we spoke about the rhythm, you need to establish the patterns. You need to sort of have a particular behavior that you feel restless when you haven't studied. It must bother you when you haven't spent enough time with your studies. You must feel that something is wrong because you know your rhythm, you know your pattern, you know your structure. And if things are not going accordingly, you must feel that something is missing. That's when you have developed a rhythm for your studies and you are creating time for your studies. If you are restricted and you are studying part-time, your hours per week study budget is also restricted. You need to remember also that even when you are studying part-time, because you've got other responsibility, you need to think about the time that you need to study. I said you need to think beyond the normal time. People always think that I must study after work or I must study during the day, but you forget, oh, I've got time that I can wake up early in the morning before work. If you can't study during the day, can you allow people to sleep so that you can get time to study? So that is important, that you accommodate the time you have so that you have also time to study. You also need to make space for your postgraduate studies. We spoke about the issue that the library could be closed. Therefore, your bedroom or your kitchen or your dining room could become your campus or your study area. Or maybe you just need a desk in your room. Whenever that space is ideal, should be as personal and private as possible. A place where you are comfortable and connected. Some of us might have to use a garage. If that is the space where you could study, you need to use that so that you could be comfortable. You also need to create and negotiate your space within your family or within your community. When we spoke about support, I have spoken about think about what you need and who do you need. Do you need a quiet space with few distractions? If this space is not really available at home, where will you study? I do not want to even further explain this since we have spoken about this earlier on. One another aspect that is important for your studies is negotiating support. Your study success is not only dependent on your own efforts. You need other people, as we mentioned earlier on. You need your family, your employer, your friends. Negotiating the support of others means that you will help the people in your life understanding the demands of open distance e-learning, and that you will communicate your challenges, success, and needs in terms of your studies. We need to understand and appreciate that open distance learning, especially in the new learning environment with the pandemic, can be very lonely. Therefore, it's important for each one of us to create our own community of learning. Sometimes as students, we always think about the community of learning as people who are highly educated. Not necessarily. Remember, depending on your needs, you might need different people for different roles in your life. You might need your grandmother who haven't gone to school at all to just being there for you when you want to vent, when you are frustrated because you wanted to submit your assignment online and the system was not working. Your grandmother could just be there and offer an ear and support when you share your frustrations, your feelings. She doesn't need to understand the complexities of distance learning, but she is able to relate to the feelings of frustration, and she can be able to listen to you. We must, however, remember negotiation is a give and take situation. You also have to think about what you can give back to those who support you. This can range from giving others feedback about your study process, spending time with them when you are not studying, and including them when you reward yourself for your success. What type of support you need personally in order to cope differently with the rest of the year. Sometimes we always think about the support we need on an academic level. Then we forget about ourselves as personal, emotional human beings. So you also need to think about then to say, what do I need as a person? Do I need somebody to run with every morning to help me deal with the stress of the day? Who will be that person? As we spoke about the support, we also need to think about preparing to study during current COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. We are still in level 2. Maybe not so long we will move to further level as the circumstances changes. But you still need to think about your studies during this current pandemic situation. We are in a unique circumstances that warrant us to take time to acknowledge our own thoughts and feelings. The pandemic impact on us as human beings. We are all being impacted because we are either infected or affected by the COVID-19. It's time to check in and make sense of the new reality, which is still uncertain, and how it affects us. We cannot just move on as if nothing is happening. It is important to take some time to reflect on where we are in order to deal effectively with the new reality. There is still uncertainties of how things will be. However, we can still focus on our current challenges, deal with what we can control in order to manage what we cannot control. Some of us were studying last year while the pandemic was there. There are things we can take from the previous experience to think about what was I in control of. How can I use some of those things to be focused now and remain in control? As we continue to talk about preparing to study during the COVID-19, we have all been going through the motions to complete our honors exams or committed to our dissertation or thesis submission dates. At the same time, trying hard not to be overwhelmed. To some extent, we try so hard not to be overwhelmed that we even deny or dismiss our humanness. We invalidate our feelings. Even when you felt anxious and worried, you possibly focused on exams or submission dates to avoid dealing with other challenges in other spheres of your life. Most importantly, we have all been trying hard not to be infected by the virus. And at the same time, we remain affected by the effects in different ways. It is important to take this background into consideration, since our reflection on this year or exams or submission dates cannot be separated from our current context. It cannot be separated from our current context because some of us, we may be constantly checking on ourselves if we have got symptoms of COVID-19 or not. We also need to check in and reflect on our psychological state. As part of reflecting, you need to reflect on your own personal space, both emotionally and psychologically. Where are you? What are you thinking and feeling at the moment? What are your fears and concerns when thinking about your academic year? There might be things that discourages you about this pandemic, not only on an academic level, but also on a personal level. And if that is not acknowledged and taken care of, it could impact on your academic performance. In this presentation, we have just been talking on preparing for your postgraduate studies. Of course, there are a number of aspects that we have just touched on briefly. You could learn more on other aspects and access other resources that could help you manage your studies more effectively on our website. You could also contact us at counseling@unisa.ac.za so that we can support you with your studies. Thank you, and I hope this presentation will encourage you and motivate you to start taking care of yourself, but furthermore to manage your studies for success.